Harlem's most feared man walked through the front door of Murphy's diner like he owned the place. The bell chimed, conversation stopped, forks froze. Halfway to mouths, Bumpy Johnson wasn't supposed to be there, not in that part of town. Not in a whites-only establishment where his presence alone could spark a riot. But there he stood, 6/8 T of controlled danger in a perfectly tailored suit. His eyes swept the room like a predator sizing up his prey. The silence was deafening. Murphy himself, a thick-necked Irish immigrant who'd built high's reputation on keeping undesirables out, emerged from behind the counter, his face flushed crimson. His hands trembled with rage. "You lost, boy." Murphy's voice carried across the din, like a death threat. Bumpy smiled, not the kind of smile that puts people at ease. The kind that makes smart men reach for their guns. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Bump, White replied, his voice calm as still water before a storm. "To understand what happened next, you need to go back to a night when everything changed. When Murphy made the biggest mistake of his miserable life, it started with a girl. It always does. Mary Washington was 17, beautiful, innocent. She worked nights cleaning office buildings in Midtown to help her family survive. Every Tuesday, she'd stop at Murphy's diner on her way home, just for a cup of coffee and a moment's rest. Murphy tolerated her barely. He'd serve her at the back counter away from his respectable customers. Made her pay double, called it a convenience fee. But tolerance has its limits. That Tuesday night, Mary was counting her tips. Nickels and dimes spread across the counter like scattered hopes. She was short, 3 cents short for her coffee. "Please, Mr. Murphy," she whispered, "I'll bring the 3 cents tomorrow. I promise." Murphy's laugh was cold as winter in the Bronx, PR. "Omizes don't pay bills, girl. No money, no service." Mary's eyes filled with tears. She gathered her coins, her dignity scattered like her dreams. But as she turned to leave, exhaustion took over. Her legs buckled. She collapsed. The other customers watched. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. They just stared at a 17-year-old girl lying unconscious on a dirty diner floor. Murphy stepped over her like she was trash. "Somebody get this thing out of my establishment." What Murphy didn't know was that Mary Washington wasn't just any girl from Harlem. She was under Bumpy Johnson's protection. Her had saved Bumpy's life in Alcatraz. Blood debts run deep in Bumpy's world. When word reached Bumpy, his reaction was biblical, not rage, something colder, something infinitely more angorous. Murphy thinks he can disrespect what's mine. Bumpy's voice was whisper quiet. His men knew that tone. It meant somebody was about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. Bumpy spent studying Murphy, learning his routines, his fears, his weaknesses. Every man has pressure points. Bumpy specialized in finding them. Now standing in that whites-only diner, Bumpy was ready to collect his debt. Murphy's hand moved toward the baseball, but he kept behind the counter. "I said, you're lost, boy. This ain't your neighborhood." Bumpy took a step forward. The floorboard creaked under his weight. Funny thing about neighborhoods, Murphy, they change. The tension in the room was suffocating. Customers shifted nervously. Some reached for their wallets, ready to flee. Others Ned forward, sensing blood in the water. Murphy gripped his bat tighter. "You threatening me in my own place." Bumpy's smile widened. "I don't make threats, Murphy. I make promises." What happened next would become legend in Harlem. But it wasn't what anyone expected, because Bumpy Johnson didn't become the king of Harlem through violence alone. He became king through something far more powerful. But what Murphy discovered about his own past that night would haunt him forever. And what Bumpy revealed would change everything. Bumpy stood in the center of that diner like a still arm waiting to break. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Murphy's knuckles were white against the baseball bat handle. "You got 10 seconds to walk out that door," Murphy snarled. Before this gets ugly, Bumpy checked his gold pocket. Watch. The gesture was deliberate, calculated. 10 seconds, he looked up with those cold predator eyes. That's generous. Most men don't get a countdown before they meet their maker. Murphy's face twisted with rage. This was his territory, his rules. No way some Harlem thug was going to disrespect him in front of his customers. His reputation was everything in this neighborhood. Boys, looks like we got ourselves a problem, Murphy called out to his regulars. 3 men stood up from their corner booth. Big me, and docker types with scarred knuckles and mean dispositions. They'd handled troublemakers before. Bumpy glanced at them with the interest of a man studying insects. You sure you want to do this? Murphy, because once this dance starts, there's no walking it back. Murphy swung the bat, not to hit, just to intimidate. The whip whished through the air inches from Bumpy's face. Any normal man would have flinched. Bumpy didn't even blink. Next one connects, Murphy threatened. That's when Bumpy did something nobody expected. He laughed. Rich, deep laughter that filled every corner of that hate-filled diner. The sound was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Murphy, Murphy, Murphy. Bumpy shook his head like a disappointed father. You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you? The 3 dockers moved closer, forming a semicircle. Bumpy was outnumbered 4-1, exactly where Murphy wanted him. This was going to be a lesson the whole neighborhood would remember. See, that's the problem with men like you, Bumpy continued, his voice conversational. You think respect comes from fear. You think power comes from a bat. Murphy raised the weapon higher. Shut your mouth and get out. But you made a mistake weeks ago. A big one. You put your hands on someone under my protection. Murphy's confidence wavered for just a yes. Econ, I don't know what you're talking about. Mary Washington, 17 years old, worked jobs to feed her family. You let her collapse on your floor like she was garbage. The diner. Patron shifted uncomfortably. Some remembered that night. The girl who fainted. How nobody held. Murphy's grip tightened. What happens in my diner is my business. Was your business, Bumpy C. Or acted. Now it's mine. That's when Murphy made his fatal error. He swung for real this time, put everything behind it. The bat whistled through the air toward Bumpy's skull. Bumpy moved like liquid. Mercury, the bat sailed past his head and splintered against the wall. Before Murphy could recover, Bumpy had his wrist in a grip that could crack bones. Lesson 1, Bumpy whispered, his voice barely audible, but somehow filling the room. Never swing at someone unless you're sure you can hit them. Murphy's face went white with pain. The 3 dockers rushed forward. This was the moment to be heroes, to save their boss and earn respect. They never got the chance. The diner door chimed. 6 men walked in. Not ordinary men, Bumpy's men. Each one was dressed sharp enough for our church, but carried themselves like wolves. They didn't say a word, didn't need to. The dockers froze mid-charge. Suddenly, the odds weren't so favorable. Bumpy released Murphy's wrist. The man stumbled backward, cradling his arm like it was broken. You see, Murphy, that's lesson 2. Never start a fight unless you're prepared to finish it. But Bumpy wasn't done teaching. Not by a long shot. You know what your real problem is. Bumpy straightened his tie. Sunday morning. You think being white makes you untouchable. You think that sign on your door gives you power. Murphy's eyes darted to his customers. They were all staring at him now, waiting to see what their tough guy owner would do when faced with real danger. But here's what you don't understand. Bumpy continued. Power isn't about the color of your skin. It's not about signs on doors or baseball bats. Real power is about information. Bumpy reached into his jacket. Murphy flinked head, expecting a gun. Instead, Bumpy pulled out a manila envelope, thick, heavy, full of secrets. See, I spent weeks learning everything about you, Murphy, everything. Bumpy's smile was sharp. As broken glass, your real name, your debts, your connections, where you really came from. Murphy's face went from white to green. You're bluffing, am I? Bumpy opened the envelope, paid, and pulled out a single photograph. He held it up so only Murphy could see. The effect was immediate. Murphy's legs gave out. He grabbed the counter for support. His eyes went wide with terror that had nothing to do with physical violence. That's right. Bumpy nodded. I know about Chicago. I know about the fire. I know about the family you left behind. The customers couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see their tough guy owner, crumbling like wet paper. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. You can't, Murphy whispered. Nobody knows about that. I know about the money you took. I know about the people who died. And I know about the men who've been looking for you for 15 years. Bumpy put the photograph back in the envelope. The gesture was casual, devastating. Those men in Chicago, they're still angry. Murphy, still looking for justice. Imagine how grateful they'd be if someone gave them your address. Murphy was shaking now. The bat lay forgotten. On the floor, all his arrogance, all his hate had evaporated like smoke. What? What do you want? Bumpy's smile was patient, terrifying. I want you to understand something fundamental. There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who protect the innocent and those who prey on them. He stepped closer. Murphy couldn't back away any further. You preyed on a girl and are my protection. That makes this personal. The diner was silent except for the tick of the wall clock. Everyone could feel the tension, the electricity, the sense that history was being made. So here's what's going to happen. Bumpy continued. You're going to learn what real consequences look like. But what Bumpy pulled from that envelope next would destroy more than just Murphy's reputation. It would unravel a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the neighborhood's power structure. Murphy stared at the envelope in Bumpy's hands like it contained at his death sentence, which in many ways it did. Please, Murphy whispered, whatever you want. Money. I can get money. Bumpy's laugh was cold as winter wind. Money, you think this is about money? He shook his head slowly. This is about respect, about understanding your place in the natural order. The diner customers watched in fascination. Their tough guy owner was begging, egging. Some pulled out bills to pay their tabs, ready to flee. Others leaned forward, mesmerized by the drama unfolding. See, Murphy, you made this personal when you disrespected Mary Washington. But what you don't understand is that I've been watching you for years, waiting. Bumpy gestured to one of his men. A tall, lean figure stepped forward, impeccably dressed, cold eyes. Meet Detective Williams, Harlem Precinct. Also happens to be Mary's cousin. Murphy's face went ashen. A cop. Bumpy had a cop in his pocket. Detective Williams has been very interested in your operation here. Bumpy continued. Conversationally, the numbers running out of your backroom. The loan sharking, the protection racket you've been running on immigrant families. Willie. AMS stepped closer. His badge caught the diner's harsh fluorescent light. Funny thing about investigations, Murphy. Sometimes they take years to build a case, but when they're ready ... He smiled. They're airtight. Murphy's knees buckled. He grabbed the counter harder. You can't. I pay my dues. I keep my mouth shut. To the wrong people, Bumpy said quietly, that's your fundamental misunderstanding. You think paying offbeat cops gives you protection. You think intimidating working girls makes you powerful. Bumpy opened the envelope again. This time he pulled out a ledger, thick, well-worn, filled with names and numbers that could destroy lives. But real power comes from knowing everyone's secrets. And, brother, do I know yours? Murphy's eyes fixed on the ledger. He recognized it. How could Bumpy have gotten it? It had been locked in his safe. hidden behind a fake wall, impossible to find, looking for. This Bumpy flipped through pages of incriminating evidence. Tommy the fish sends his regards. Turns out your safe wasn't as secure as you thought. Tommy, Murphy's most trusted employee, the man who worked for him for years, who knew every secret, every hiding spot, every weakness. Tommy's been working for me for months, Bumpy revealed. Amazing what a man will do in USA. That his daughter from a predator, the betrayal hit Murphy like a physical blow. Tommy had been like a son to him, trusted with everything, and he'd been feeding information to Bumpy Johnson. You see, Murphy, while you were busy humiliating teenage girls and playing tough guy, I was building a web around you. Every move calculated, every piece positioned. Bumpy nodded to another of his men, Thi. S1 was smaller, wiry, with the look of someone who'd spend time in places most people never see. Meet Ezra. He used to work for your friends in Chicago. Very interesting stories about a warehouse fire, about money that went missing, about families that died because someone was too greedy to warn them. Murphy's face went completely white. His legs gave out completely. He slid down the count until he was sitting on the floor staring up at his destroyer. Those families had relatives, Murphy. Relatives who spent years looking for the man who took their money and left them to burn. Ezra smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. They're still looking, still angry, still want justice. But here's the thing about justice. Bumpy continued, his voice steady as a Judge P. Renouncing sentence, sometimes it comes from the law, sometimes it comes from the streets, and sometimes it comes from simply giving a man enough rope to hang himself. Murphy was hyperventilating now. Years of living a lie, thinking he was safe, and it was all crumbling in one night. What? What do you want? He gasped. Bumpy crouched down, bringing his face level with Murphy's when he spoke. Ket. His voice was barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. I want you to understand something fundamental. There are rules in this world. Ancient are you? Less. You disrespect what's mine. You face consequences. You prey on the innocent. You get taught a lesson. Bumpy stood up, straightening his jacket. But I am not an unreasonable man. I believe in redemption, in second chances. Hope flickered in Murphy's eyes. Maybe he could get out of this. Maybe there was a deal to be made. So here's your choice. Bumpy continued, you can face justice from Chicago. Detective Williams can process his arrest warrant. The pause stretched like eternity. Or you can make amends, real amends. Murphy grabbed onto TH. A possibility like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Anything. I'll do anything. Bumpy smiled, but it wasn't the cold, predatory smile from before. This was something different, something that suggested he'd been planning this moment for a very long time. See that sign on your door? The one that says whites only. Murphy nodded frantically. You're going to take it down. Tonight in front of everyone. Murphy's mouth opened and closed like a fish in this neighborhood. That wasn't just changing a sign. That was social suicide, economic destruction. His white customers would never come back. But that's not all. Bumpy continued. You're going to do more than just serve everyone equally. You're going to become something this neighborhood has never seen be. For, he leaned down again, you're going to become a bridge, a place where people from different worlds can sit together, share a meal, find common ground. Murphy looked around the diner, his cue. Stomers were watching, waiting to see what he'd choose. Some looked disgusted at the suggestion. Others seemed curious, and if I refuse? Bumpy's expression didn't change. Then Detective Williams Mack, as his arrest. Ezra makes his phone call to Chicago, and Tommy testifies about everything he knows. Murphy closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. The fight was gone. The arrogance was gone. For the first time in years, maybe the first time in his life, he looked human. How do I know you'll keep your word? Because unlike you, Bumpy said quietly, my word actually means something. The diner was silent, except for the hum of the coffee machine and the tick of the wall clock. History was being made, not through violence, not through destruction, but through something far more powerful, choice. Redemption, the possibility that even the worst men could change. But as Murphy reached for the door to take down his hateful sign, neither he nor his customers knew about the crowd that had gathered. Outside, word had spread through the neighborhood. People were watching, waiting, and what Murphy discovered about the true power of that moment would change not just his diner, but the entire neighborhood forever. Murphy's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. The white's only sign hung there like a monument to his hatred. Years of hiding behind it, years of thinking it made him untouchable. The crowd outside had grown. Word travels fast in neighborhoods like this. Some came to watch Murphy's humiliation. Others came hoping for violence. Most came because they sensed history in the making. Murphy's fingers touched the sign. Cold metal, sharp edges, it had been his shield for so long, his declaration of superior. ITY. Now it felt like a chain around his neck. Go ahead, Bumpy said quietly. His voice carried the authority of a man who'd never doubted this moment would come. Show them who you really are. Murphy looked back at his customers. The dockers who'd been ready to fight for him now avoided his eyes. The regular patrons whispered among themselves. Some were already heading for the door, unwilling to witness their hero's fall. If I do this, Murphy whispered, I lose everything. Bumpy stepped beside him. For a moment, they stood shoulder to shoulder, two men from different worlds bound together by this moment of truth. You already lost everything, Bumpy said, the moment you chose hate over humanity. This is your chance to find something better. Murphy's hand closed around the sign, one quick motion, and his old life would be over. His reputation in this neighborhood, his sense of superiority, everything that had defined him for years. But as he hesitated, Bumpy made a gesture to Detective Williams. The cop stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the harsh light. Michael Patrick Murphy, Williams began, his voice official and final. You're under arrest for racketeering, illegal gambling, operations, and conspiracy to commit. Wait, Murphy's voice cracked. Wait. He looked at the crowd outside, faces pressed against TH. E-glass, some angry, some curious, some hopeful. For the first time in his life, he really saw them. Not as threats or inferiors, but as people. Human beings with hopes and fears and dreams. Used like his own, Murphy yanked the sign from the door. The metal scraped against glass. The sound was like a scream, like something dying. He held it up for everyone to see. The crowd outside went silent. NT, inside the diner, you could hear a pin drop. This, Murphy said, his voice stronger now. This is who I used to be. He walked to the garbage can behind the counter. The sign hit the bottom with a hollow clang. Years of hatred thrown away, like the trash it had always been. But the crowd wasn't satisfied with symbolism. They wanted more. They wanted to know if this change was real or just another con. That's when Mary Washington walked through the door. She looked exactly as she had weeks ago. Young, tired, working-class dignity wrapped around her like armor, but something in her eyes was different now, stronger. The diner went completely silent. Every eye was on her. The girl who'd collapsed on this very floor, who'd been treated like garbage by the man, now standing behind the counter. Miss Washington, Bumpy said formally, would you like a cup of coffee? Mary looked around the diner, at Murphy, who couldn't meet her eyes, at the sea, customers who watched her collapse without helping, at the spot on the floor where she'd fallen. That depends, she said quietly. Am I welcome here? All eyes turned to Murphy. This was his moment, his chance to prove that change was possible, or to reveal himself as the same coward he'd always been. Murphy's throat worked. He tried to speak, failed, tried again. Miss, he said. Finally, his voice barely above a whisper, Miss Washington. I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air like smoke. An apology from Murphy to a black girl in front of his white customers' TH. At night, Murphy continued, finding his voice. What I did, what I allowed to happen, it was wrong. You deserved better. You deserved basic human decency. Mary said nothing, just waited. I don't expect forgiveness. Murphy went on. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that your coffee is free tonight, and every night for as long as you want it. Still, Mary waited. She learned to be careful with white men's promises. Murphy reached into his cash register, pulled out money, more money than Mary made in a week. This is for the humiliation, he said, holding it out. For tea. Dignity I took from you. It's not enough. It'll never be enough, but it's a start. Mary looked at the money, at Murphy's outstretched hand, at the crowd watching through the windows. Slowly, she walked to the counter, sat on the same stool where she'd collapsed weeks earlier. I'll take that coffee now, she said simply. Murphy's hand shook as he poured. The cup rattled against the saucer. Feast washed over the edge. He'd served thousands of cups in this diner, but none had ever mattered like this one. He set it down in front of her. Steam rose between them like incense, like EP, rare for redemption. Mary lifted the cup, took a sip. The whole world held its breath. It's good, she said. Those two words broke something in Murphy. Years of hardened hatred cracked open, tears he hadn't cried since childhood began to fall. But the real shock came from outside. The crowd wasn't angry. They weren't rioting. Some were crying, too. Others were nodding approval, a few Eve, and started to clap. Bumpy watched it all with satisfaction, not triumph, not revenge, satisfaction. This was what real power looked like. Not the power to destroy, but the power to transform. You see, Bumpy said to the room, his voice carrying to every corner, respect isn't something you take, it's something you earn. And redemption is always possible for those brave enough to choose it. Murphy looked up from his tears. Why, he asked. You could have destroyed me. Why give me this chance? Bumpy's answer was simple, profound. Because destruction is easy, creation is hard, and the world has enough destroyers. The diner door chimed again. More people coming in. Black faces, white faces, people who'd never shared the same space before, drawn by curiosity and hope. Murphy looked at them all. His new customers, his new reality. For the first time in years, he smiled, a real smile. Not the cruel smirk of a bully, but the genuine expression of a man finding his humanity. But as the night wore on and the impossible became real, none of them knew that someone was watching from the shadows across the street, taking pictures, making notes. Someone who had very different plans for Bumpy Johnson, because Murphy's transformation was just the beginning. What happened next would test everything Bumpy believed about redemption, power, and tea. The price of changing the world. Months later, Murphy's diner had become something nobody could have predicted. The legend, the miracle, the place where hatred died and hope was reborn, the TR. Transformation wasn't just in the paint on the walls or the mixed faces sharing tables. It was deeper, fundamental. Murphy himself had become unrecognizable from the bitter man who'd once rolled through fear and prejudice. Every morning sharp, Murphy would unlock the doors personally, not because he had to. He could afford help now, but because he wanted to greet each customer like they were family, because he learned that dignity wasn't something you rationed based on skin color. The breakfast rush was different now. Construction workers sat next to college students, Harlem music. Sean shared coffee with Wall Street clerks who discovered this hidden gem. Elderly Jewish immigrants played chess with young black intellectuals. The impossible had become routine. Mary Washington still called me every Tuesday, but now she brought her textbooks. Murphy had quietly arranged with the local community college to pay her tuition. Not as charity, as investment. Smart girls like you He told her, "You're going to change this world. I want to be able to say I helped." The financial transformation was equally dramatic. Murphy's revenue had tripled. Turns out when you serve any with respect, word spreads. The diner that had once survived on the loyalty of bigots now thrived on something more powerful, genuine community. But success brought unexpected challenges. The old neighborhood powers weren't pleased with Murphy's transformation. Store owners who profited from segregation found their own businesses suffering as customers flocked to Murphy's inclusive model, the Loca, a political machine built on division, and fear saw Murphy's diner as a threat to their control. That's when the real test came. It was a Tuesday evening. The dinner rush was in full swing, laughter mixed with conversation in 3 different languages. The cash register sang its profitable song. Murphy was wiping down tables, genuinely smiling as he worked. The door chimed, for men walked in, not customers, enforcers, sent by the neighborhood's shadow rulers, who decided Murphy's experiment had gone too far. The lead enforcer was Frank the Hammer Kowalski, 300 pounds of muscle and malice. He'd built his reputation on breaking bones and spirits. His message was simple: conform or suffer. Murphy, Frank's voice boomed across the diner. Conversation stopped. Forks F. Rose halfway to mouths. The peaceful atmosphere shattered like glass. Murphy looked up from his cleaning. Months ago, he would have reached for his bat, would have met violence with violence. Now, he set down his rack and walked calmly to the counter. "Frank, what can I do for you?" Frank's laugh was ugly, mean. "You can start by explaining why you're harboring undesirables in a respectable neighborhood." The racial slur hung in the air. Like poison, several customers shifted uncomfortably. A few reached for their wallets, ready to leave. Others, the regulars who'd come to love this place, stayed put. They'd seen Murphy change. They believed in what he'd become. "Everyone's welcome here," Murphy said quietly. "That's how it works now." Frank stepped closer. His 3 companions spread out, blocking exits. This was intimidation 101. Control the space. Control the fear. "See, that's where you're wrong, Murphy. That's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked in this neighborhood." Murphy's hand trembled slightly. Old habits, old fears. For a moment, he was the same coward who'd hidden behind hatred for years. But then he saw Mary Washington in the corner booth studying for her midterm exams, representing everything good that had come from his choice to change. And he remembered Bumpy Johnson's words: "Real power comes from choosing who you want to be." Times change, Frank, Murphy said, his voice steadier now. People change. Frank's massive hand slammed down on the counter. The register jumped. Coffee cups rattled. "Not in my neighborhood. They don't." That's when Murphy surprised everyone, including himself. He laughed. Not the bitter, cruel laugh of his past, but something warm, genuine, the laugh of a man who found peace with his choices. "Your neighborhood." Murphy shook his head. "Frank, you don't own anything. You're just another bully who thinks fear equals power." Frank's face went red. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody. His reputation was built on absolute respect through absolute terror. "You got 10 seconds to throw out the trash," Frank growled, gesturing at the black customers. "Or I'll do it for you." Murphy looked around his diner at the faces watching him, waiting to see what he'd do. Would he revert to his old ways when tested? Would fear win over growth? "No," Murphy said simply. Frank blinked. "What Rice said? No, these people aren't trash. They're my customers, my friends, and you're not welcome here if you can't respect that." The silence was deafening. Frank Kowalski had never been refused. Not once in years of neighborhood enforcement. His reputation was cracking in real time. "You sure you want to do this, Murphy? You sure you want to make this choice?" Murphy nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Frank reached inside his jacket. Not for a gun, to public, to messy for brass knuckles. He was going to beat Murphy unconscious in front of everyone, make an example, show the whole neighborhood what happened to those who defied the old order. But as Frank's hand closed around the weapon, and the diner door chimed again, Bumpy Johnson walked in like he owned the place, which in every way that mattered, he did. Frank froze. Every enforcer in the city knew Bumpy's reputation, knew his reach, knew that crossing him was career. Suicide, gentlemen, Bumpy said pleasantly, adjusting his cufflinks. I heard there was some kind of misunderstanding here. Frank's confidence evaporated. This wasn't part of the plan. Bumpy Johnson wasn't supposed to be involved. This was just neighborhood business, local politics. Mr. Johnson, Frank stammered, this don't concern you, just cleaning up some local issues. Bumpy smiled, that cold, predatory smile that made smart men nervous. Frank, when you threaten my friends, it becomes my concern. When you disrespect a place I frequent, it becomes my business. Frank looked around desperately. His backup was useless against Bumpy Johnson. The customers were watching with fascination. Murphy stood behind the counter, no longer afraid. See, Frank, you made the same mistake a lot of men make. You confused reputation with respect. You thought fear was the same as power. Bumpy walked slowly around the diner, his footsteps echoing in the silence. But real power comes from building something instead of tearing it down. From creating value instead of destroying it. Frank's hand released the brass knuckles. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Murphy here learned that lesson. Bumpy continued. Months ago, he was just another small man hiding behind big hatred. Now he has built something beautiful, something that brings people together instead of driving them apart. Bumpy stopped in front of Frank. The size difference was dramatic. Bumpy was elegant where Frank was brutish, controlled where Frank was crude. So, here's what's going to happen. You and your boys are going to walk out that door. You're going to tell whoever sent you that Murphy's under my protection, and you're never going to darken this doorway again. Frank nodded frantically. Yes, sir, Mr. Johnson. Absolutely, no problem at all. But as Frank turned to leave, Bumpy called out one more time. Oh, and Frank, next time someone sends you to intimidate a man for choosing love over hate, you might want to ask yourself what that says about the people giving the orders. Frank practically ran for the door, his men close. Behind, the diner erupted in applause, not just for Bumpy, but for Murphy. For the choice he'd made, for the courage he'd shown, as the applause. As he died down, Bumpy approached the counter. Murphy met his eyes with something he'd never had before. Genuine gratitude mixed with hard-earned self-respect. Thank you, Murphy said simply. Bumpy nodded. Thank yourself. I just happened to be in the neighborhood. You're the one who chose to stand up. Mary Washington approached from her corner booth, textbooks in hand. Mr. Murphy, she said formally, would you mind if I brought my study group here Thursday nights? We could use a quiet place to work. Murphy's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears, Miss Washington. You bring what hour? Over you want, whenever you want. This place belongs to all of us now. As Mary walked out into the night, Murphy turned to Bumpy. How did you know? How did you know I wouldn't run? Wouldn't T go back to the way I was? Bumpy's answer was simple, profound. Because real change isn't about one dramatic moment. It's about choosing to be better every single day. And Murphy, every day for months. You made that choice. The diner slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Orders were taken. Life went on. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in Murphy's diner, but in the entire neighborhood. Word spread fast in communities like this. Murphy had faced down Frank Kowalski, had chosen principle over safety, had proven that change wasn't just possible, it was powerful. Other business. S began following Murphy's lead. The barber shop down the street quietly took down its discriminatory policies. The local grocery store started hiring workers based on skill instead. Skin color change spread like ripples in a pond. Years later, Murphy's Diner was featured in national magazines as a model of community integration. Murphy himself had become a speaker at civic organizations, telling his story of transformation and redemption, but he never forgot the lesson Bumpy Johnson had taught him that first night. That real power wasn't about who you see, hurt, but about who you could help. Not about what you could destroy, but about what you could build. And every Tuesday, when Mary Washington came in for coffee, now Dr. Mary Washington, on the neighborhood's first black female physician, Murphy would remember the night he chose to become human. The lesson was simple, powerful, and eternal. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Redemption isn't a destination. It's a daily choice, and sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's transforming them into allies. Murphy learned that hatred is easy, but building bridges takes courage. That destroying takes no skill, but creating something beautiful requires everything you got. And in a world full of people choosing division, Murphy had chosen unity in a time when fear seemed easier than hope. He'd chosen love. That's the kind of courage that changes neighborhoods. That's the kind of power that changes lives. That's the kind of legacy that lasts forever. Because in the end, the measure of a man isn't who he was at his worst. It's who he becomes when he chooses to be better.